I'm going to read something of this section. You know a little bit about David's life at this point, so you know that he, as I say, he's this early meteoric success, and then at some point, not only is he addicted to drugs and alcohol, but he also, I think more importantly, he loses the sense that he needs to write at all. He's already, not only did he publish The Room of the System when he was well, he wrote it in college, published it first year of graduate school, but he also, during the time when he and Roger intersect, has gone on to write this short story collection called The Girl with Pure Hair. And then, having written these stories that are kind of like knocks on all the different doors of fiction, all the postmodern styles of fiction, while David is trying to figure out that immense genius of his, just what kind of writer he wants to be, he decides at the end of graduate school really he doesn't want to be any kind of writer, that there's nothing worth writing, that writing is kind of a sham. As a result, so David always wanted to be the best at everything, right? And what happened is he decided, weirdly enough, after publishing 2 books, that what he wanted to do was become a professor of philosophy. His father was a professor of philosophy, actually, at Cornell, when he was born, and then in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And his mother was a professor of English, so in a sense he was kind of going from honoring his mother to honoring his father. But what's weird is he was a very established author at this point. And I don't think there are many instances of an established author who suddenly says, you know what, I don't really want to be a writer anymore. I mean, writing is fairly addictive itself, and being published is extremely addictive. If you ever, are at a party and you meet a published author, one of the sort of safest questions you can ask him or her is, what are you working on now? Nobody will ever say that, now I'm selling insurance. I lost interest in literature. No, it's you keep going. So it's kind of amazing when this guy sort of throws it over, right? I don't think he thought he would never write, but he was going to be like, he's sort of a Wallace Stevens type model. He's going to be a professor of philosophy, and then, in his spare time, I guess he thought maybe he'd do some writing. He felt like it. So he goes to wanting to be best at everything. He applies only, I think, to 3 graduate schools of philosophy. One is Pittsburgh, which is a great philosophy department. One is Harvard. Gets into Harvard, and off he goes, right? So at the age of what, doesn't seem that old to me, but what seems old if you're, I think, in the world of graduate schools, I think he's 28 when he starts. I think he's 28, 27, 28. There he is, a student again. And the truth is he's not really, he's not a student. Being a student is a certain moment, I think, in a person's life. When they say someone's a lifelong student, they don't really mean that they're necessarily going to classes consistently and getting the work done on the schedule that the professors are dictating. And so David really lost the ability to be that cooperative, fundamentally. And so he's only there for a few days, for a few weeks, and I think it's immediately obvious to him and everyone else he's not going to graduate from Harvard in philosophy. Not going to happen. He's got a half-written novel, he's working on some magazine pieces, he's getting high all the time, he's having a kind of crazy life, living in Somerville, one town over from Cambridge. It's not going to happen, It's a really hard course. It's a kind of weird boot camp. You think going to philosophy, I would have thought, before I wrote this book, that graduate school in philosophy would be sort of like lazing around, on one of those sort of soft couches like in the back there, with cups of bad coffee trying to have one great thought a day. Like just one would do it and you graduate summa cum laude. But it turns out actually that it's really almost like med school, and you have to make yourself, well, it's like any graduate program. The main job is to make sure you have a knowledge of the vast writing that's gone before you. Like if you're an English graduate student, it always amazes me when I meet English graduates, English literature graduate students, and they're like, oh, I'm reading the 16th century this semester. And you're like, wow. Or I'm doing Victorian novel, you're like, but there's thousands of them. How? So David had to master an enormous amount of pretty dry writing. And he, as they lasted a couple of, I think it's 8 weeks, I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, at some point he pretty much, I think, fundamentally gives up. And he goes to the Harvard Health Services, and he announces that he has suicidal thoughts. And David had already tried to kill himself a few years before, so it wasn't as if this was, not credible. It was enormously credible. And when I had first heard this, I assumed it was true. But now I actually think that David, who was a veteran of mental health systems, was gaming the system. Not that he wasn't depressed, I think he was depressed, but I think he was figuring out as graceful an exit as he could possibly make from the graduate program. Remember, his father's a professor of philosophy. The humiliation of failing out of the program would be enormous for him. He was somebody who felt humiliation really keenly. So I think David basically realized that if he said those words, he would, the universities have to do something if you say you're thinking of hurting yourself. I don't think that they're allowed to just send you back to your dorm. And he knew they'd have to take him to some sort of supervised facility. And there's a wonderful, famous psychiatric hospital associated with Harvard called McLean Hospital, where all sorts of, Sylvia Plath was there and Robert Olson. So I think David figured if he couldn't be if he couldn't be at Harvard as a graduate student, he would at least be at Harvard as an inpatient. And so it worked well, and he went. He activated the protocol, off he went. Everyone who visited him in those days after he was, sent to McLean was surprised at how relieved he was, really. And I think he was kind of in a nightmare situation, kind of found a way out. The weird thing is he sort of expected, I think, that he'd go back to Harvard as soon as he could just get his head together. And they told him that that wasn't going to happen, that he had to go to a halfway house. And that's the part I'm going to read you, because really going to the halfway house is really, I think, what changes not just his life, but also, I think, more importantly for us today, his fiction. So the halfway house is called Granada House. Granada House was on the grounds of the Brighton Marine Hospital near the Massachusetts Turnpike. Wallace found it funny that the Marine Hospital would be nowhere near water. The compound consisted of 7 buildings, 7 moons orbiting a dead planet, as he would later describe it in Infinite Jest, all leased to various substance abuse groups. Wallace met Deb Larson, the director, in his new temporary home. Anyone who's read Infinite Jest or will read it will see all these people will pop up. Tall and blonde, she walked with a limp. Drunk, she had fallen down in her kitchen, hitting her head, causing a partial paralysis. And even then, she hadn't stopped drinking. Wallace respected and liked her at once. She was pretty and smart, and she gave him a link to an old life that was still his present. You could almost see Harvard from the top floor of the building. Recovery facilities tried to control the stress levels of their participants, and one activity that they generally prohibited was school. Think about that for a minute. You could get a job, but they knew that it was too stressful to be in school. Wallace had no choice but to call the philosophy department at Harvard and ask for a leave of absence. He was too humiliated to go back to get the vegetable juicer, a gift from his mother that he had left behind in his department office. And now he was expected to find low-level work. Wallace, whose only real skill was teaching and writing, cast around and was able, probably because he had put the head of Amherst College Security on his resume, to get hired as a guard at Lotus Development, a large software company. Granada House rules required a 40-hour work week, so Wallace got up at 4:30 in the morning to take the Green Line subway and worked until 2 p.m., walking a vast disc packaging plant in Lechmere, clocking in his whereabouts every 10 minutes and twirling his baton, or so he later said. I don't think he actually did that. I think he sat and watched from video monitors like every security guard in the world, but I think he liked the idea of being like a kind of Keystone Cop security guard, because he wrote a little short story that was published when he was an undergraduate that's never been republished since, which is about a guy walking around kind of spinning his nightstick and clocking in. He would tear pages out of his notebook and send letters to his friends, maintaining contact with a small group of editors and writers who were vital to him. The Lotus experience, he recalled in a later interview, reminded him of every bad 60s novel about meaningless authority, but at the time he bore it well. Give me a little time to get used to no recreational materials, and wearing a polyester uniform, and living with 4 tattooed ex-cons, and I'll be right as rain, he wrote a friend ironically after arriving. But in his heart he was stunned. I am, he wrote one of his Amherst professors. And how odd is that right there, to be writing your college professors? That's why I was so thrilled to have David's letters. He wrote letters to everyone he'd ever been in contact with, and they're wonderful letters. I am, he wrote, okay, though very humiliated and confused. He was sharing a barracks-like room with 4 men, one of whom, he wrote, Rich C., his old 12-step sponsor, had had a stroke while on cocaine and had a withered right side. Mr. Howard, he told his editor, W.W. Norton, his book publisher, everyone here has a tattoo or a criminal record or both. And to his professor, he reported, "Most of the guys in the house are inmates on release. And while they're basically decent folk, it's just not a crowd I'm much at home with. Heavy metal music, black t-shirts and Harleys, vivid tattoos, discussion of hard verse soft time, parole boards, gunshot wounds, and Walpole, Massachusetts' toughest prison." He continued at his security job for more than 2 months, and then, unable to bear getting up so early, he quit. He went to work after as a front desk attendant at the Mount Auburn Club, a health club in nearby Watertown. His job was to check the members in. He called himself a glorified towel boy. But one day, Michael Ryan, a poet who had received a Whiting Award, alongside him 2 years before, came in to work out. Wallace dove below the reception desk and quit the same day. His friends were accustomed to his exaggerations and inventions over the years. They came with his clownish, hyperbolic personality. But when they visited him at the halfway house, they found that what he said was actually true. He had stepped through a sort of looking glass. His friend Deborah Spark, the fiction writer, remembers sitting in on a group therapy session with Wallace one day and being amazed to hear someone recount killing someone else while drunk. All the same, Wallace found his place. Order, no matter how far in the context, was always easier for him than the unstructured world that was outside. His sponsor was named Jimmy, a motorhead from the South Shore, as he called him to a friend. Wallace read the big book, the founding text of Alcoholics Anonymous, and enjoyed making fun of its cheesy 1930s ad man vocabulary to his friends. Tosspot, Dave Sheen heels, boiled as an owl. He laughed at them, but he also knew he needed them where he would die. Mark Costello, his college roommate, remembers. And if Wallace found himself in unfamiliar territory, the residents didn't know what to make of him either. No one really cared for his cleverness. He was to them a type they'd seen many times before. Someone who, as Wallace would later write in Infinite Jest, tries to erect denial-type fortifications with some kind of intellectualist showing off. He was back in high school trying to figure out his place in the pack. "It's a rough crowd," he wrote his old Arizona sponsor, "and sometimes I'm scared, or feel superior, or both." Yet a piece of him was beginning to adjust to the new situation. He remembered his last failed attempt to get sober, and how he was no longer writing, and asked himself, what did he have to lose? He came to understand that the key this time was modesty. He knew it was imperative to abandon the sense of himself as the smartest person in the room, a person too smart to be like one of the people in the room, because he was one of the people in the room. "I try hard to listen and do what they say," he wrote Rich City, his sponsor. "I'm trying to do it easy this time and not get an A+. I just don't have enough gas right now to do anything fast or well, and I'm trying to accept this." Not that things came easily. The simple aphorisms of the program seemed ridiculous to him. And if he objected to them, someone inevitably answered him with another, telling him, for example, to do what was in front of him to do, or to take it one day at a time, driving him even crazier. He was astonished to find people talking about a higher power without any evidence beyond their wish that there were one. They got down on their knees and said the thankfulness prayer. Wallace tried once at Granada House, but it felt hypocritical. All the same, he liked